Hi, Sue Leitch here from Winter Creek Mosaics. I've been doing mosaics since early 2000 and I really enjoy how through mosaic you can play with light, you can play with different materials and see how they work together. You can blend with colours through hard materials rather than soft materials such as paint. And you can bring playfulness into design depending on the way you mix materials and the sorts of colours and styles that you bring into your mosaic. This little box is my travel box. When I'm travelling overseas, I usually like to take some materials with me to work while I'm away, get inspired by the things I see. And it's also a good example of showing you some of the materials that I like to use. This is Smalty. It's fused glass, and this particular one comes from Italy, and it's Orsoni Smalty. Comes from Venice, from the island, from the area of Canoriggio, and it's the most beautiful material. When I first started doing mosaics, I mostly used crockery, like most people do when they start mosaics. And I'd heard about Smalty and was very interested in it. I liked the colours, beautiful range of colours you can get. And I also liked the different effects that you can get with Smalty. So I saved and started with some of the cheaper styles and practiced and completely fell in love with it as a material. As you can see, it catches the light. Orsoni Smalty comes in about 5,000 different colours, which is just amazing. Next, let's see what we've found. Treasure. So this is gold Smalty. As you can see, the base is blue. This is the traditional gold colour. And then you've got what appears to be gold paint on the surface there. It's not gold paint, it's gold foil with a thin, very thin layer of glass fused over the top. So this is called Dalle de Verre, and it's a transparent glass, and it creates some beautiful effects. So for my current exhibition, the fish market, I've used it in a couple of pieces. So it's in the crab. It's also, I have murky waters in the eel, are all made from Dalle de Verre with some inserts of Smalty included. So this is scavenged glass. It's quite textured. I actually got this in Greece. As you can imagine, when I travel, I come back with all sorts of wonders. This was refuse glass near a lighthouse, and I love its semi-frosted appearance, the way the light plays through the material, and the different shapes that have been formed as it's broken. Marble, it cuts beautifully. It creates nice, interesting shapes. So the traditional cut for marble in traditional mosaics is this sort of trapezoid shape. And this is a crema, beautiful Italian marble. But you can see this is very ordered shape. It's a tetrahedron, the most common shape in traditional mosaics. However, our beautiful brown shatters naturally into some really interesting shapes that the light can play off. Mille fiori. Or, in Italian, it translates to 1,000 flowers. It's also fused glass, and it's made by putting canes of colour together and then slicing. But you can get a range of different shapes in a myriad of colours. And in fact, behind us here we have a mixed jar of different mille fiori, and it can bring some sparkle to your work. And I do like to use mille a fair bit. Also in my little travel box is this beautiful polished stone. It's got a feathered grain through it, some transparent quartzy sections. I do like to use these as well. They appear in my fish series. In fact, in my swordfish, I think I've got some of this beautiful agate. Very smooth in comparison to the marble. So again, it provides a contrast and brings a bit of interest into your work. Quite unique. When I take this little box travelling, I never really know what I'm going to make. It depends on what's inspired me during the day, what I've seen, how I want to play the colours, and I can get some surprises. I'm now going to talk you through how I go about designing my mosaics, and particularly the fish series. So I usually start with something, and these have been given to me recently. So they're a beautiful teal bead. Quite like these. They've got some shells in there and some glass beads. So I'll need to pull those apart, but I think that they will look quite nice. I'm quite keen to use my fish head here and see what can come from that. I usually use a colour wheel to help work out how my mosaic's going to work out. So I'm thinking of using these similar colours in this range here. But as you can see behind me, I've flipped to the warm side of my colour wheel as well, so opposite those colours, to see get some reds and some yellows in there as a bit of a highlight, and some oranges. Not so many of those, you can see. The focus will be on the cool colours and a highlight of reds and oranges as I go. So I've got these grouped together, and they're going to be the basis of my mosaic, my colour scheme. Now, you will see in most of my mosaics that I like to use rusted elements. Quite heavy, will affect the weight of your mosaic, but they add a lot of interest. I've got a mosaic artist friend who calls it rustic gorgeousness, but it just gives a bit of interest to your mosaic. So I don't usually attempt to cut this. I use them whole in my mosaics, and I just love the background, you know, the colours in the rust, but also the textures and a bit of the history that sits behind it as well. So I'll find a way of incorporating that shape into my mosaic in some way and see where I go with that. So I roughly know that this is just going to, it's a small piece, so it will probably just be a fish head. I've got this beautiful piece of pizza pizza section that I want to use. Quite often when I'm doing my fish heads, I actually am looking at the shape of the mouth to see the style of fish that it's going to be. So I think it's already got its character there in the mouth. A bit different to some of my other fish that I've got. I do use these lovely beads. I have a friend who is a glass artist, and she fuses these eyes for me, so that will come into play. I've got some refuse glass. It is a bottle top. It's from an old vintage bottle. I'm going to work that with the eye. So you can see that the eye is now sitting inside the glass. I tend to take an anatomical view of the fish with its various areas. I think I'm going to put this on top. I'll need a special glue to stick that glass on glass. So it'll need to be an indoor piece for that to work. I've got quite a sharp razor on that side of that bottle glass, and I want that to be at the top of the eye. So I'm just going to place that there. I won't be doing any gluing at the moment. I'm just playing with the mosaic to see how it is going to look. Now, my shoehorn, how are we going to make that work? So I quite like the look of that. It's adding a bit of shape to the fish now. You can see what we've got going on here. And we're using that rusted element as part of the shape. Okay, welcome back to our fish. Nothing here is glued, and it may not end up looking like this, but it's to give me a bit of a plan of where I want to go. I tend to play like this first before I start gluing, because once you've mixed glue, you've got about 2 hours to play with it, and you want to keep working pretty closely and on the ball while you're doing that. So I like to get a feel of the colours, for example, to begin with. So we've got a lovely mauve at the front there. In that middle section, before we join up to the rusted element, I'm going to do some more truer blues, and probably throw in some of those warm colours as a bit of a highlight. Now I'm thinking on this side that I'm going to go with the teals to have it similar in colour tone, but moving into a more greeny tone with the beads and a mixture of smalty. Quite often with my larger fish, I tend to divide the top of the fish and the bottom of the fish into different textures, but this is a small piece, so I'm just going to keep the one the way through here. I've got my agate here as the defining bottom line, because I think that would look quite nice. And it's got some browns in it that match up with the rust, the element. And over here, just to see how it's looking, I've got a more traditional row of marble laid out in a traditional flow or andamento of the marble that will work its way around the fish. And this is a defining style of opus, or a way to lay mosaic around the main feature. So I'm going to be doing that, and I'll mirror that all the way around the top of the fish, so up on this line as well. And then we'll get those traditional elements coming into the mosaic coming from there. So no glue as yet, but that's okay. It's this form of intuitive mosaic. It's good to get a feel of where you're going first. So I haven't drawn a design as such at all. It's what the pieces of tesserae, the mosaic pieces, are telling me how the design's going to work out. I've started laying the back part of the fish head, and I'm just doing a fairly regulated laying of the tiles. You can see here that I've got a bed of adhesive ready to take some more, and it's a matter of trying to alternate the colours to blend them as much as possible. Put that one there. See if we can get that thin piece in there. Quite nicely. And I'll continue to fill that out. I've got some beads down here, and I've started to edge it off with that jade. I'm changing things up for the next section. I've cut some quite irregular triangular shapes here that I'm going to sit vertically into the piece. So we have a bed of mortar down. This section will be predominantly blue, but we'll also put some red bits in. As you can see, I'm putting that quite dramatically, poking up. It's the effect I want to get. Quite handy to use tweezers when you're doing this sort of work, to place your pieces and move them. Keeps your work clean too. So I'll continue to lay these in every now and again. I'm going to put contrasting colour. I'm going to now show you a little bit more about how the mosaic ended up and talk you through some of those features. The main feature that you can see is this section of the smalty slab, which they call pizzas, because when they come out they're essentially round. So this is a small section that's broken in a particular shape and looks very reminiscent of a fish head. So I've used that as the main feature. You've got some different colours coming through the smalty here. In the purples, there's a few different shades going through. You can see I've got my horseshoe here, which is the rusted element, and that's forming a anatomical boundary between the fish head and the rest of the fish. So what I've done here is used a couple of different styles of laying my mosaic, so a couple of different sorts of andamento and different materials in these different zones of the mosaic. So we've got some Mexican smalty here, which is all the same height in the aquas. We've got our moss jade down the bottom here, which is looking beautiful, moss agate. And then we've got our beads as well. I've added a couple of little sections of gold just to give it some interest. Not a lot of gold, but just enough to catch people's eyes. In this middle section, it's quite structural, and you'll be able to see that I've got spiky pieces of glass here, and I've used my contrasting colours just every now and again to bring some interest into the mosaic. Of course, you know that to make purple, when you're using traditional paint and materials, you would be mixing reds and blues. So it's nice. It's a nice connection through to the purple smalty section here. We've got our vintage glass to form the eye socket and the fused glass in the middle there. Down in this corner I have a slice of shell, which you can see, and that's a signature piece that I use for my fish series. So I've made sure that I've included that into the work. I've also got some traditional crema marble, which I've laid in a more traditional style of andamento. It's following the form of the fish, and then just to make it a little bit different, I've included a couple of rough pieces of the crema where they break on the natural veins, and you get these rough, darker pieces. So you can see that I've interspersed them just to add a little bit of interest. And I've also added in some of these turquoise beads that we've got in the fish body back into the background. So it's tying the background through to the main piece. But I hope that you've enjoyed this short video on the materials that are very special to me in making mosaics, and that you can enjoy understanding a little bit more about mosaics and what makes them such a special form of art.